Hello everyone, my name is Snehlata and I'm a PhD student and a PMRF fellow at the Department of Biological Sciences and Bioengineering at IIT Kanpur. Today we will continue with the next lecture of the unit Cell, the Unit of Life. So till now we have studied about the eukaryotic cells, and in the eukaryotic cells we have studied about the plasma membrane. What is the structure of the plasma membrane and what are the components that are present in the plasma membrane? Today we will study about the role of the plasma membrane. Okay, so if you remember, we have saw that the plasma membrane consists of a fluid and a lipid and a protein, and due to the presence of the lipid, it has a fluid nature. So the fluid nature of a plasma membrane is because of the presence of lipids. Now, due to this its fluid nature, plasma membrane have different roles. One of such role is cell growth. So, what do we mean by cell growth? It means increase in cell mass and cell size, right? So, the cell growth means that the cell increases in its mass as well as in its size. So, for that, in order to accommodate this thing, a cell has to increase its boundary as well, right? And the boundary of the cell is plasma membrane. So, suppose this is a cell. So, when it will grow, it will increase in the size, right? Its all content will increase in the size. And for that purpose, the plasma membrane also grows. And in this way, it helps in the cell growth. Now, the second function of the plasma membrane is cell division. So we know that a cell comes from new cells comes from already existing cells, right? So this is a new cell. These are the new cells that comes from already existing cells. And during how does they come? During the cell division, this plasma membrane separates itself. So apart from all the organelles and the nucleus that divide, the plasma membrane also divides. So the plasma membrane divides something like this, and then they detach from each other, and then it becomes two new cells. Okay, so it in this way it helps in cell division. The third role of plasma membrane is the interaction. So here, by interaction I mean cell-cell interaction. Okay, so it means cell-cell interaction, or it is also called intercellular interaction. It is also called as intercellular interaction. So in our body or in any cell, eukaryotic cell, such as plant and in animals, the cell do not remain in isolation. Okay, so cell remains something like this. So they remain in contact with each other. Okay, and these cells continuously talk to each other and then they perform a function as a whole. Okay, so how does this cell interact? So this cell, with the help of their plasma membrane, form a structure something like this. So they form a structure something like this. So this will be the structure. So this is one cell, this is another cell, and they form this intercellular junction. So this is called intercellular junction. And through this intercellular junction, the cells communicate with each other. Now, the next function of the cell is secretion. So suppose a cell has made something. So a cell has made something. Now this cell has to remove it or move it out of the body. So they do it via the cell membrane. Okay, so they do it via the cell membrane, and this is called secretion. And the next is the transport. So one of the major function of a plasma membrane is transportation. So what is transportation? It is basically movement of materials. Transportation is movement of materials either inside or outside of the cell, either inside or outside of the cell. And this is one of the major function of a plasma membrane. Now we will study in detail about the transportation or how transportation takes place in a plasma membrane through a plasma membrane. So the transport in the cell membrane or plasma membrane is of two types. And on what basis it is divided into two types? It is divided on the basis of size or nature of material that has to be transported. Okay, that has to be transported. So it is on the basis of size or nature of material. And on that basis, it is of two types. The first one is bulk transport. The first type is bulk transport, and the second type is specific transport. Okay, so the second type is specific transport. Now we will see what does a bulk transport means. So the first type is bulk transport. So as the name suggests, bulk. Bulk means large amount, or you can say that is of large size or large volume, right? So if a cell has to take inside or outside something that is of a large size or large volume, then it will be called as bulk transport. Now, the bulk transport further is of two types. Okay, so the first type is called endocytosis. So the first type of transport is called endocytosis. Now, what do you mean by term endo? Endo means internal. Okay, so it means if a cell, suppose this is a cell, it is nucleus. So if a cell is taking something that is bulk, right? So if a cell is taking something inside, then this process will be called endocytosis, right? So endocytosis is intake of material inside cell, right? Inside cell. So this is called as endocytosis. Now, this material can be anything. This material can be either solid, right? It can be either solid or it can be liquid, that is in large volume, right? So it can be also liquid. So on that basis, endocytosis is of two types. The first one is if a material is solid. So if a material is solid, it will be called as phagocytosis. So phagocytosis, that is intake of solid material. Okay, so intake of solid material is called as phagocytosis, and this is also called as cell eating process. Cell eating process. Now, the second type is if the material is liquid. So if a material is liquid, this will be called as pinocytosis. This will be called as pinocytosis. So pinocytosis is intake of liquid. And this is also called as cell drinking process. Okay, this is also called as cell drinking process. Now, so this is about endocytosis. Right? Now there is a second type of bulk transport, and that is called exocytosis. Okay. So the another type is called exocytosis. Exo means external. So suppose if you have a cell, it has something inside it and it wants to secrete it out, then this process is called as exocytosis. So exocytosis means secreting or excreting something out of cell, excreting material, and this is also called as cell vomiting process. So what we saw is that the transport through a plasma membrane is of two types on the basis of the size and the nature of material that has to be transported. in which the first one is the bulk transport, or something that is transported in a large size or a large volume. Okay. Now next, we'll study about the specific transport. So what do we mean by specific transport? Specific means something that is very specific, or that, for example, if you want to transport something of glucose, so you know that this is a particular molecule that we want to transfer, certain gas, etc. So this is the specific transport. Now the specific transport is also of two types. On what basis? On the basis of requirement of energy. Okay. On the the specific transport is of two types on the basis of requirement of energy. So there are certain things that when they are transported through a plasma membrane, they do not need energy. Okay. But in certain cases, when a particular material is transported, it requires energy. So on the basis of the requirement of the energy, or you can say ATP, because in the cell, energy is in the form of ATP. So on the basis of requirement of ATP, the specific transport is of two types. So the first type is passive transport. Okay. So the first type of transport is called as passive transport. Now, what is passive transport? It is a transport in which no energy or ATP is required. Okay. So there are certain materials which are, when transported, do not require any energy, and this type of transport is known as passive transport. Now, the passive transport is of different types based on the type of material that has to be transported. Okay. So the first type of passive transport is diffusion. Okay. So the first type is diffusion. Now, what is diffusion? Suppose you have a cell. Right? Now, inside there is certain gas. Okay. Such as, say, certain gas whose concentration is high outside of the cell. So it is a particular gas whose concentration is high outside and it is low inside. So the gas will simply move from outside to inside across this lipid bilayer. Remember, this plasma membrane is made up of lipid bilayer. So the gas will easily cross this plasma membrane or diffuse through this plasma membrane and will inside. So what do we understand by diffusion? We saw that movement of a material from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, low concentration. This is known as diffusion. And in the case of plasma membrane, what are the examples of diffusion? The examples are gases. So there are certain gases like CO2, O2. This can be moved through simple diffusion process. Another molecule that can move is lipid. Okay, so lipid, as we know, these are non-polar molecules. Lipid are non-polar. And this plasma membrane is also made of non-polar molecules, right? These are also made up of lipids. So, as we know that like dissolve like. So this lipid molecule, because they have same nature as the plasma membrane molecules, they will simply diffuse through the plasma membrane. So why lipid moves without requirement of energy? Because they have same nature as plasma. They have same nature as plasma membrane. Okay. So these are the certain examples of the molecules that move via diffusion. Now the second is facilitated diffusion. Second type of passive transport is facilitated diffusion. Now, suppose you have a polar molecule, okay, and a polar molecule such as, say, glucose. Right. Now, glucose is comparatively larger in size and it is also polar, right? Now, this this plasma membrane is of non-polar nature, but this glucose molecule is polar. So, how would it transport, or how would it pass through this plasma membrane? So, because of their opposite nature, this glucose requires a special kind of protein. Okay, it requires a special kind of protein through which it moves. Okay. And this special kind of protein is called as channels. So although the transport or the movement of glucose from outside to inside do not require energy, but they require a special kind of protein, and this protein is called channel. So the facilitated diffusion is one where carrier protein, yes, carrier. So because this carrier protein is facilitating the movement of the glucose molecule, so in this case, carrier protein is required, and hence this type of diffusion is known as facilitated diffusion. And the example of facilitated diffusion is, like I said, the polar molecules. Polar molecules. Okay. Now, there is third type of passive transport that is called as osmosis. Osmosis. So, what is osmosis? Suppose you have a water molecules. Okay. You have a large number of water molecules. So these are S2, whose concentration is higher outside. So the water molecule concentration is higher outside and it has low concentration inside. So the water molecule will simply cross this plasma membrane. Okay, so they will cross this plasma membrane, and this process is known as osmosis. So osmosis is defined as movement of water molecules from high concentration to lower concentration. Okay, so this is known as osmosis. So we saw the types of passive transport. Now, the passive transport is the one in which no energy is required. Now, the second type of transport is active transport. Right. So the another type of transport is active transport. Now, what is active transport? It is a type in which ATP is required. ATP is required, right? So in the case of active transport, ATP or energy is required. So in this case, the examples are ions. Okay. So ions such as Na plus, sodium ion, potassium ion, calcium ion. So the movement of these molecules or ions across the membrane requires energy. And so how do they move? So suppose this is your plasma membrane. So these molecules also require a special kind of protein. They cannot simply go through the lipid bilayer. They also require a special kind of protein that is embedded in the plasma membrane. But these proteins are called, these proteins are called as pumps. Okay. So during the active transport, the ions move via a special kind of protein that is known as pumps, and it requires ATP or energy. Okay. So now you can see in the summary that what I just described, right? So in the case of bulk transport, we had seen two types, the endocytosis and exocytosis. Endocytosis means if the cell is taking something inside, right? And it can be of two types. The first one is the solid and the second one is the liquid. If it is a solid food, it will be called as phagocytosis. And example, you can write example, macrophages. Okay. Macrophages are the cell that engulfs or kill bacteria that infect our body. So they do this via phagocytosis. Now, the second one is if there is a liquid material, then it is known as pinocytosis. And if the cell secretes something out, so suppose this is a material, if the cell secretes this out, then this process is known as exocytosis. Now, if you talk about the specific transport, so the specific transport is of two types. The first one was passive transport and the second one is active transport. In the case of passive transport, no ATP is required and it is of three types. If it is gas or lipid molecule, it passes through the diffusion. If it is a polar molecule, then they will pass through the facilitated diffusion through this protein. This protein is called as channel. And if it is a water molecule, it will simply pass through osmosis. And in the case of active transport, it will require ATP. And these are mainly for the ions. And the ions move via this pump. And ions example can be sodium ion, potassium ion, etc. Okay. So we saw what is the role of the plasma membrane. Now, One more important thing, that the plasma membrane is called as semi-permeable. So why it is known as semi-permeable? Because you can see that this plasma membrane, it is selectively allowing certain molecules to pass through it, right? So allow it allows selective molecules to pass through it. Okay. So it acts as a barrier which allows selective molecules to pass through it. And because of this reason, this is known as semi-permeable. This is known as semi-permeable membrane. Okay. So we saw that in the last lecture, we saw what is plasma membrane, what are its components, and now we have seen what are the functions of the plasma membrane, what are the different type of transport that is done or that is occur in a plasma membrane. Now let's solve certain questions and then we'll move to next topic. So the first question is that a plasma membrane is made up of. So the first option is a protein, lipid, and a cellulose layer. Second is a bimolecular lipid layer, protein and carbohydrates. Third is a protein layer between two lipids layer. And the fourth is a lipid layer between two proteins layer. So if you remember that a plasma membrane, we saw the constituents of the plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane looks something like this, right? So it has this lipid bilayer, right? They have this lipid bilayer. And inside this lipid bilayer, they also have inside this lipid bilayer, they also have this different kind of protein. So this is lipid, this is protein. And apart from this, if you remember, they also have a chain of carbohydrates over it. And hence it is called glycoprotein. So the correct answer would be a bimolecular lipid layer, proteins and carbohydrates. Now, the second question is, the fluid nature of membrane helps to perform functions like, so we just saw what kind of functions it can perform. It can perform cell growth and cell division, right? It can perform endocytosis, that is a form of a bulk transport, right? It is a form of a bulk transport. And then it also helps in the formation of intercellular junction. So the correct answer will be all of the above. Okay. So we have understood about the plasma membrane. Now the next thing that we will discuss is the second component of a cell, that is a cell wall. Okay. So we'll now discuss about the cell wall. So what is cell wall? So cell wall in the eukaryotic cells, it is the outermost layer. So it is the outermost layer that is present in a cell, and by outermost layer it means it is outer to plasma membrane. It is outer to plasma membrane. So you have this plasma membrane, and then outer to the plasma membrane there is another layer that is called as cell, and this is plasma membrane. Now, what does this cell wall do? It provides protection to the cell. So the cell wall provides protection to the cell. There are various other functions of cell wall that we'll see later. Now, this cell wall is considered as non-living or dead component of a cell. Okay, so this is called as or considered as non-living or dead component of a cell. Now, why this is called as dead component? Why? Because this cell wall is made up of something that is secreted out of the cell. So the cell made something and it's secreted out, and this secretion then get deposited over the plasma membrane, and this form the cell wall. So because of this reason, it is known as or called as living or dead component. So why it is called a dead component? Because it is produced by deposition of the deposition of secretory material from the cell. Secretory materials from the cell. And because of this reason, it is known as non-living or dead component of the cell. Next thing, what is its nature? It is rigid in nature. It is rigid in nature. So these are the component, or this is the feature of a cell wall. Now the next thing is, where does this cell wall present? So presence. So where does the cell wall is present? So you must have studied during your this kingdom classification chapter that there are many kingdoms, right? So there are mainly five kingdoms. Sorry, the first one is Monera, right? Second one is Protista. Third is Fungi, and fourth is Plantae, and fifth is Animalia. Now we will see where these cell walls are present. Are they present everywhere or in all kind of cells? The answer is no. So in the Monera, I remember the major example of Monera is studying prokaryotic cells. We saw that yeah, cell wall is present in the bacteria, and this cell wall is made up of. So it is present and made up of peptidoglycans. So the cell wall in the Monera is made up of peptidoglycans. And what are peptidoglycans? These comprises of two carbohydrates, NAD and NAD. And they also have certain proteins, right? Now, the second is kingdom is Protista. So in Protista, it is present in some, okay? So present in some, not in all Protista. These are present in some of the protists. And what is the composition of the cell wall? This is made up of cellulose, or it can be made up of cellulose or other modified sugars, okay? Modified sugars or proteins, okay? So the cell wall is not present in all the protists. It is present only in some protists, and it is made up of cellulose, modified sugars, or proteins. Now in the fungi, all the fungi have the cell walls and their cell wall, so it is present, and it is made up of chitin. So there is one polymer of sugar that is known as chitin, and this chitin is polymer of NAG. Polymer of NAG. So what is NAG? NAG is an acetyl glucosamine. And acetyl glucosamine. So in the fungi, it is made up of chitin. Now in the Plantae, so Plantae basically comprises of the plants in which it can be further divided. You can say one is algae, that is lower plant, and the another is higher plants. Okay, other are higher plants. So in the algae, the composition of the cell wall varies from the algae with respect to the higher plants. And what could be the reason? One of the reason can be that the algae are present in the water, so they have a different environment, right? While the higher plant, they are present on the land, so they have a different environment. And because of this reason, their cell wall compositions vary. So if you talk about the algae, so in algae, the cell wall is made up of, it is made up of cellulose, galactane, it is made up of cellulose, galactane, mannans, and calcium carbonate. Okay, and calcium carbonate. While in the case of higher plants, it is majorly made up of cellulose. So cellulose is a major component. Apart from cellulose, it also comprises of hemicellulose. It also comprises of hemicellulose, pectin, and certain proteins. Okay, so these are the components of the cell wall of higher plants. Now, if we talk about the animalia, so in the case of animalia, cell wall is absent, right? Cell wall is absent. So animal cells do not have, the animalia kingdoms organisms do not have cell wall. Okay, so we saw that the cell wall is present in major four kingdoms, out of which in protist, some of the protists have the cell wall while others do not. But in the Monera, fungi, and Plantae, all the organisms consist of cell wall. Now, we'll now study in detail about the cell wall of a higher plant. Okay, so we just saw the composition. If we talk about the composition, so what is the composition? It comprises of majorly cellulose. The cellulose majorly, right? And apart from cellulose, it comprises of hemicellulose. Then it comprises of pectin and proteins. Okay, so this is the composition of the cell wall in the higher plants. Now, what does the structure of a cell wall looks like? So here you can see that these are the different layers. So this is cell type, cell number 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now you can see that there are different layers surrounding the cell wall, surrounding these cells. So the first layer or the innermost layer is, what is the innermost layer? So the innermost layer is plasma membrane. The innermost layer is plasma membrane. Now, if you see next to this plasma membrane, there is this thick layer, right? This thick layer. This is called as secondary cell wall. This comprises of secondary cell wall. Now, next to this secondary cell wall, you can see there is this thin layer, right? This thin layer. And what this layer is called? This is called primary cell wall. So this layer is called primary cell wall. And now you can see that these cells are connected to each other, right? These are connected to each other. And how they are connected? You can see this green layer, and this layer that connects these cells is known as middle lamella. So this is known as middle lamella. So if we talk about the cell wall basically consists of two types of cell wall, the primary, secondary, and these cells are connected to one another by another component that is known as middle lamella. Now we will study all of these components one by one. So the first component is primary cell wall. Okay. So what is primary cell wall? So the primary cell wall, it is the outermost layer of cell wall, right? Outermost cell wall layer, right? There's the outermost cell wall layer. Now, if you see from the figure, it is thin, right? So this layer is thin. This layer is thin. Now, apart from this, they are also elastic. So the elasticity is high. So elasticity is high. Okay. Now, apart from this, where these are present? Are they present in all the plants or in some plants? So these are present in young plants. Okay. So these are present in young plants. So the primary cell walls are present in young plants, and in mature plants, this slowly diminishes. So when a plant becomes mature or old, these cell walls diminishes. So they diminishes in mature plants. Okay. So these are the features of a primary cell wall. Now, if you talk about the composition of these primary cell wall, so it has typical plant cell composition, that is, plant cell wall composition, that is cellulose, hemicellulose, pectin, and protein. So this is a typical composition of primary cell wall. Okay. So this is about primary cell wall. Now the second thing is secondary cell wall. So if you see, so secondary cell wall is next to the plasma membrane and it is thick, right? So what you can write about the secondary cell wall, that it is present. Where it is present? It is present between plasma membrane. It is present between plasma membrane and primary cell wall, right? And primary. So this is how I am denoting primary cell wall. Okay. Now, where these are present, so these cell walls are present in the mature plants. Okay. So these are present in mature plants. Okay. So these are present in mature plants. And if we talk about its composition, so what is the composition of secondary cell wall? So the composition, if we talk about, so it mainly consists of two things: lignin. It comprises of lignin, and there is one more, that is suberin. Okay. So it comprises of lignin and suberin. So these are the two things of which the secondary cell wall is made up of. Now, if you look at the structure of a secondary cell wall, right? So the secondary cell wall, if you see, it will look something like this. So if you see, zoom this, so you can see that there are three layers present. There are three layers that is present in a secondary cell wall. Okay, so it is a secondary cell wall. Then we know that inside it we have plasma membrane, and outside it we have a thin layer that is called, this is called primary, and the inside is called plasma membrane, right? So if we talk about the secondary cell wall, what is the name? What is the name of these three layers? The name of these three layers are, the innermost layer is called as S3. Okay, so the innermost layer is called as S3. The middle one is called as S2, and the outermost is called as S1. So these are the three layers that is present in the secondary cell wall. So you can write that these secondary cell walls generally have three layers, right? What are the layers? S1, S2, and S3. These are S1, S2, and S3. Now, if someone asks you that which is the oldest layer and which is the newest layer, okay? So you should know that the cell growth takes place from inside to outside, okay? The cell grow from inside to outside, okay? So if someone asks you that which is the oldest layer, the oldest will be one that is inside, right? So the H3 will be the oldest layer, right? And which will be the newest? It will be S1. So S1 will be the newest. S1 is the newest layer, right? Okay. Now since we have seen the secondary cell wall, let also study about one more term that is known as PIDs. So what are PIDs? So you just saw that this is the structure of a cell wall that comprises of primary cell wall and secondary cell wall. Now, if there are certain cases in which you can see that there are certain regions where this secondary cell wall, it do not grow. Okay, so it does not grow. So there can be different regions in the secondary cell wall where it does not grow. So these reasons are called, these reasons, if you say, these are called as pits. Okay, so the pits are the regions where the secondary cell wall is absent. The secondary cell wall is absent. So this region would be, this region would be called as pit. Okay, now this can also be called as unthickened cell wall. Okay, so the region which is not undergo thickening is called as pits. Okay, so we saw what is secondary cell wall, what are the layers of secondary cell wall, and then we also saw that what is pit. Now next thing that we will study is about middle lamella and plasmodesma. So if you remember from the figure, the middle layer is the one that is connecting the two cells together, right? So what you can write about middle lamella? You can write about middle. So if you start with the middle lamella, so you can write that it is present. It acts as a cementing layer, right? It acts as a cementing layer. What do you mean by cementing layer? That it glue two cells together. It glue two cells together, right? And where it is present? So it is present between two neighboring cells, right? So it is present between two neighboring cells, right? So middle lamella is present between two neighboring cells, and hence they act as a glue between two cells, right? Now, what is the nature of this middle lamella? They are sticky in nature, and that's how they glue two cells together, right? So they are sticky and amorphous in nature. So amorphous means soft, okay? Amorphous in nature. So now they are not crystalline, they are jelly-like, amorphous in nature. And what they are made up of? So this composition, if we talk about the composition of a middle lamella, so the middle lamella is mainly made up of calcium peptide. it is mainly made up of calcium pactate. But apart from calcium pactate, so the major component is calcium pactate. It also consists of magnesium pactate. It also consists of magnesium pactate. Okay. And now, if you talk about the function, so one of the function we saw, right, that it has a cementing layer. It acts as a cementing layer. And the second function is it become, in a raw fruits. So in the raw fruits, this middle lamella is hard, right? But when the fruits become ripened, this middle lamella becomes soft. Okay, so you can say that the fruit is becoming ripened because of the softening of this middle lamella. So it, in a way, it is helping. So it helps in ripening. It helps in ripening or softening of fruit. It helps in ripening or softening of fruits. Okay. So these are the functions of middle lamella. Now we have seen middle lamella. Now the second thing is plasmodesmata. So the second thing is plasmodesmata. So what do we understand by plasmodesmata? So if you see this figure, so this is a figure where these are the two cells. These are the two cells, right? Now, in this case, there is certain reason. Okay, so there are certain reasons where the middle lamella will be absent. Okay, so there are certain reasons where this middle lamella and this complete thing will be absent. Okay, and this region will form plasmodesmata. So this region will form plasmodesmata. Okay, so if you say, so what is plasmodesmata? It is a region where the middle lamella is absent. You can write middle lamella is absent. First thing. Now the second thing, what it is doing. So the cytoplasmic content from this cell and this cell, they are now connected, right? They are now connected together, right? And how these are connected? So you can write that it connects the plasmodesmata connects adjacent cell cytoplasm, right? Connects adjacent cell cytoplasm. So this plasmodesmata is connecting adjacent cell cytoplasm. And how this is connecting? This is connecting through a special structure that is called as desmotubule. So this structure is called as desmotubule. Okay, so this structure is called as desmotubule. And what it is made up of? It is made up of ER. It is made up of endoplasmic. It is made up of endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, it is made up of endoplasmic reticulum. So the plasmodesmata is the region where the middle lamella is absent and it helps in connecting the adjacent cell cytoplasm, right? Okay, so this is what we saw about the middle lamella and plasmodesmata. Now, at last we will study what are the functions of a cell wall. So we saw in the starting of this cell wall slides that its first function is protection, right? So it provides protection. Now, from which things and from what it provides protections? The first one is it provides protection from injury. Okay, so because it is dead component and it is rigid in nature, it provide the cell protection from the injury. And the second thing, it also provides protection from pathogens. Okay, it also provides protection from pathogen. How? Because it acts as a barrier. Okay, a cell wall act as a barrier, right? It acts as a barrier, so it allows only certain component to pass through it. Also, although the pore size of a cell wall is bigger as compared to that of a plasma membrane, still it allows the larger molecules. It acts as a barrier for the larger molecules and allows to selectively some smaller molecules. Okay. Now the third thing is it prevents cell from osmotic bursting. Okay, it prevents cell from osmotic bursting. So we just saw, right, that what is osmotic burst? What is osmosis? So if you have a cell, this is a plasma membrane, and outside the plasma membrane you have a cell wall, right? Now if you have a water molecules that is in very high concentration outside the cell, so it will start moving inside cell, right? Now the concentration in this side will start increasing. And if the concentration at outside is very high, so more water molecules will move, right? So the water inside will, the concentration of water inside will increase. And once it will increase, what it will do, it will cause or it will put pressure onto the wall of the plasma membrane, right? So, but these plasma membranes, these are not rigid in nature, right? These are flexible in nature. So this plasma membrane shape can get distorted, right? It can become something like this, right? But this, what does this cell wall do? This cell wall maintain this shape and prevent the it from the bursting, right? So by this way, it prevents the cell from the osmotic bursting. And also you can say that it also provide cell with structural support, provides cell with structural support, and it maintains cell shape. Okay, it maintains cell shape. Apart from this, one more thing it do. What it does, it also helps in cell-cell interaction. It also helps in cell-cell interaction, right? Remember, we had middle lamella. So this middle lamella was gluing it together. Then we also saw it had this plasmodesmata. So this plasmodesmata was helping or connecting to adjacent cytoplasm. So in this way, it also helps in cell-cell interaction. So what we saw that what is a cell wall, what are the different layers of a cell wall, and what are their roles, and what are the function of cell wall. Okay. Now before moving forward, let's solve one question about the cell wall. So the question is, arrange the layer of plant cell walls from outside to inside. Okay. So A, this layer is capable of growth and diminish gradually as the cell matures. The second is formed towards the membrane side of the cell. And third is this layer holds or glue together the neighboring cells. So now you have to first identify that what are these layers and then where would they be if you arrange them from outside to inside. So let's first say, write down that what is the first layer. So it is written that this layer is capable of growth and diminish gradually as the cell matures. Okay. So what is this layer? Capable of growth, right? And it diminishes gradually. So this was primary layer, right? It was primary cell wall. So sorry. So the primary cell wall slowly diminished as the cell matures, right? Now the second option is it is formed towards the membrane side of the cell. So which layer of the cell wall is formed towards the membrane side? It was secondary cell wall, right? It was secondary cell wall. Now the third is this layer holds or glue together two neighboring cells. So what is this layer? This is middle lamella. It is a cementing layer, right? So this is middle lamella. So if you arrange these, so from the outside to inside, so outermost will be middle lamella. So this will be the first. Then next to middle lamella will be primary cell wall, and next innermost will be secondary cell wall. So what will be the correct answer? It will be first C, then A, then B. So the correct answer will be C. C, A, C to A to B, right? So now we have studied about the cell wall. Now let's move to the next topic, that is endomembrane system. So what is an endomembrane system? So as its name suggests, endo means inside, right? And membrane, that it is made up of envelope or it is surrounded by a membrane or an envelope, right? So what comprises of endomembrane system? So we know in a cell there are different organs, right? And each organelle in a cell have this distinct function and structure, right? Have distinct structure and function, right? So each organelle inside a cell has a distinct structure and a function, but there are cases in which some organelles functions are coordinated. Okay, so you can write some organelles, some organelles. First of all, the functions are coordinated. Some organelles functions are coordinated, right? As well as they are made up of membranes, and these organelles are made up of membranes. And these together, they constitute the endomembrane system. These together constitute the endomembrane system. So endomembrane system consists of those organelles. Those are made up of membrane, and secondly, their functions are also coordinated. Okay, so it means that their functions are dependent on one another. So if you say, let's see, so you have a cell, right? In the cell, you have a nucleus. So it has genetic material. This is your nucleus, right? Now, in continuous is this nuclear envelope. This is the envelope. It is the nuclear envelope. Okay. So in continuous is the nuclear envelope. There is one structure that looks something like this. Okay. There is one structure that looks something like this, and this has ribosomes attached on it. Okay. So you remember the structure. What is this structure? So this structure is, what is this? This is called as endoplasmic reticulum. And since it has this thing ribosome attached on it, it is called rough endoplasmic reticulum. That will come later, but this is called as endoplasmic reticulum for now. Okay. Now, the function of this endoplasmic reticulum is, there are different functions, out of which one of the major function is protein synthesis, right? So this endoplasmic reticulum will synthesize protein, and then this protein will be released from the endoplasmic reticulum in the form of vesicles. So these are, because these vesicles comprises of proteins, these are called as protein vesicles, and these are small vesicles, right? Now these vesicles will now go, because these are partially processed or not processed at all, so these will go to another membrane. Okay, sorry, another organelle. And what this organelle is called? This is called Golgi bodies. Okay, so it will go to the Golgi bodies for the processing, and from the Golgi bodies, these proteins or these vesicles will be then released. The processed vesicles will be released, that will either go to another organelle that is called as lysosome, or it will go to the membrane. So what we can see here, sir, that it can be a protein vesicles or lipid vesicles as well. So the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, they store lipid. So this can be. So we saw there is one structure that is endoplasmic reticulum. The second is majorly vesicles, that can be protein or lipid vesicles. The third body is Golgi bodies, and the fourth is lysosomes. So we can see that the function of all of these are dependent or are coordinated, right? That the protein or the lipid that is synthesized first from endoplasmic reticulum, it goes to the Golgi body, and then in the form of vesicles, right? And from the Golgi body, in the form of larger vesicles, it either goes to the lysosome or to the plasma membrane. So we can clearly see that the function of all these are coordinated, and hence they together form this endomembrane system. Okay, so the endomembrane system comprises of 4 organelles. So endomembrane system comprises of 4 organelles. What are these organelles? The first organelle is endoplasmic reticulum. The first organelle is endoplasmic reticulum. The second is Golgi bodies. The third is vesicles, that can be lipid or protein vesicles. And the fourth is lysosome, right? So the fourth is lysosome. So these together comprises of endomembrane system. Apart from this, the cells also consist of different organelles such as mitochondria. You have mitochondria or you have chloroplast. There are certain other, but these are not called. So this is mitochondria. This is, you say, chloroplast. But these are not called as, not will not be called as endomembrane system. Why? Apart from these four, none of these organelles will be called as endomembrane system because their function is not dependent on any other organelle. Okay, so they do not have to do anything with the processing of work that is done by these organelles, and because of this reason, there are only four organelles that comprises of the endomembrane system, not others. Okay, so this is what we saw about the endomembrane system. Now, in the next lecture, we will study in detail about each of these organelles. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you.